Okay, just so that you know, Rance Priebus appeared on all four of the morning shows this morning, and I'm not going to do videos on all four of them, but everybody knows that Stephanopoulos is basically a Democratic guy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a video on Stephanopoulos, which pretty much is going to cover the Democratic leaning guys, and then I'm going to do a video with Mike Wallace, which obviously he's on Fox, so that you have something to compare to.
Let's get more on this now from the chair of the Republican National Committee, Rance Priebus. Mr. Priebus, thanks for joining us again this morning. You just heard John Kasich there saying the convention, a contested convention, would be magical. But I wonder what you make of this call from Roger Stone, an ally of Donald Trump, putting out a call for days of rage protests in Cleveland.
Well, you know, nothing can get stolen from anyone. We have rules in place that if a candidate gets to 1,237 delegates, those delegates are bound, and they will vote that way on the floor. And if they don't vote that way on the floor, which they will, but if they don't, the secretary will read the vote as if they were bound regardless. So we will know where everyone stands on delegates on June 8th after the June 7th primaries. There will be no mystery over who has the majority, or if someone doesn't, whether it's going to be an open convention. If it's an open convention, then we're going to have to be clear, open, and transparent on what the rules say and how they're administered, and it will be very clear, and there'll be cameras at every step of the way. So there'll be no mystery.
No mystery, but what about the rules? You just heard me talk to John Kasich about that Rule 40B that in the last convention required a candidate to have won the majority of delegates in 8 states. Will that be the rule for this convention?
Well, I mean, look, even if it is the rule, it wouldn't prevent a nomination later on in the process when delegates are unbound. So, I mean, the fact is, there's a lot of people interpreting rules that really don't understand the rules. The 8-state rule was put in place after the 2012 Romney delegates changed it. So it is true that the 20...
And for those of you who don't know what that 8-state rule was, that 8-state rule was that you had to get the majority of votes in 8 states in order to be put onto the nominating ballot. They created that rule because of Ron Paul. He was able to get a significant number of delegates even though he had not won the state primaries. So they created that rule so that his name would not be able to appear on the ballot, and that's exactly what they're going to do to knock out John Kasich.
The 16 Rules Committee will review the rules, and they will decide on what the rules are for the 2016 convention. That all being said, you know, major changes to the rules are not very common. So I think you have to look at both the history of rulemaking and the fact. Sure.
Is it fair to say, though, that after a first ballot, there really are no rules? The delegates of the convention decide whatever they want to decide. If you've got a majority in the convention, they can create any rule they want to create. They can nominate anyone they want to nominate.
Generally, everyone is bound on the first ballot. In some states, they're bound on a couple votes. But you're right that on the second or third ballot, more and more delegates are unbound, and they can vote for who they want. Now, you still would have to get a certain amount of states and delegates in place in order to be nominated, and so that's important. You can't just have one person out there nominating a candidate, but generally your premise is correct, but there are rules in place to prevent, you know, 50 people getting nominated. You have to demonstrate a certain amount of support in a certain amount of states in order to get nominated. That all being said, all of this goes away if a candidate gets 1,237 delegates before Cleveland. And right now, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, they have a possibility of getting to that number, and all of this is put to bed. If it's not put to bed, George, then we're going to have an open convention. It's going to be administered properly, and we're going to have a vote. We're going to have a multi-ballot convention.
That pledge you got all the candidates to sign to back whoever got the nomination seems to be falling apart. Donald Trump said this week he's not bound by it, and he told Chris Wallace of Fox News that he's still open to running an independent bid. Now that he says he's no longer bound by the pledge, what are the consequences from the Republican National Committee?
Well, look, I mean, we expect that when candidates make commitments to the principles and values of our party, that they would keep it. If they don't want to keep it, just tell us. But I don't. Listen. I think candidates are also posturing. I think they're posturing for the possibility of an open convention. I think some candidates think that, there's leverage to be had over making these kinds of statements. There's no leverage over us. We're going to administer the convention the same way. And if the candidate can get to a majority on their own, then they're going to be the nominee, but no amount of leverage and statements are going to change it. The second thing, George, is that these statement of loyalty is in exchange for data and resources from the RNC. This is not like some sort of magical paper that we were running around with. It's the same commitment, George, that candidates made in 2012. It's the same commitment that candidates made in 2016. If you want the resources of the RNC,
so are those resources
cut off $100 million worth of
because he's
data?
Not backing the...
Listen, I'm not making that statement. I had a very good meeting with Donald Trump, and I've got a good conversation yesterday with Ted Cruz, and I'll meet with John Kasich's people next week. I think some of this is posturing, George, and I think after talking about this subject continually for the last 8 months, I would think that people in the news media would understand that it's posturing as well.
It's posturing, but words have meaning, and he said he's not bound by the pledge anymore.
They do.
At the same time, you see Donald Trump's week this week, battery charge for Corey Lewandowski, that back and forth on abortion, and you add it all up, it seems to be taking a huge toll with women, 74% unfavorable in our latest poll. And Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers, the top woman in the House Republican leadership, says this is hurting the whole party. Is she right?
Well, look, I think tone and tenor matter. We're the party of the open door. We can't grow by
Open door, my ass, open door.
Subtracting and dividing and telling people to leave the room. I've been saying that for years now. Certainly, tone matters, and I do think that what candidates say matter. But to your point earlier about the party and loyalty and all of that. Look, these folks are running to be the nominee of the Republican Party. And if what you say matters,
Donald Trump says he's offered to an independent
the delegates and the voters, right? But and those kinds of comments, I think, have consequences. And so, when you make those kinds of comments and you want people to fall in line for you, it makes it more difficult. And so, I think that candidates get that, and certainly. If you were running for president of the Kiwanis Club or the Boy Scouts and you said you don't know if you like the Kiwanis or the Boy Scouts, I think that makes your challenge even greater to ultimately win those kinds of posts. It's no different for the Republican Party.
Rance Priebus, thanks for joining us this morning.
All right, so now I'm going to shift over to Mike Wallace at Fox.
Well, as you just saw, Republican frontrunner Donald Trump says he doesn't necessarily stand by his pledge to support the GOP nominee, and he won't rule out an independent run. Republican National Committee Chair Rance Priebus watched our Trump interview along with all of you, and he joins us now from RNC headquarters here in Washington. Chairman Priebus, you just heard Donald Trump. He's keeping open the possibility that he may not support the Republican nominee if it's not him, keeping open the possibility that he might run as an independent candidate. Does that worry you?
Well, not really. I mean, I think some of this stuff is leverage and candidates that are posturing for a potentially open convention. But look, one of the things that I think people are missing is that this pledge, this pledge to support the eventual nominee comes from really a data agreement that the candidates signed. So without boring everyone to tears, we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on data and information over the last several years at the RNC. These candidates have access to that data. In exchange for getting stuff from the National Party, we say, well, are you willing to support the nominee? And they say, yes, we are, and they sign a document. My point would be, if a candidate isn't willing to commit to the principles and values of our party, then they ought to just tell us. But if they commit to it, then they should do it. And these candidates are running to be the nominee of our party. We're not running for their loyalty. They're running so that one of them will be chosen by us. And so I can't imagine a candidate for any position anywhere in America running in front of a group and saying, well, we don't know if we want to be part of this group, but we want to be the chairman or president of that group anyway.
But respectfully, sir, I feel like you're missing the point, which is obviously they're running to win, but what Trump is saying, and actually to a certain degree Cruz and Kasich as well, is if they don't win and if the other guy wins, then they may not support the candidate. I mean, the result of that would be that the GOP would be split and would have an even harder time winning in November.
Well, certainly, and you can't win by subtracting and dividing, and I understand that. I mean, we're the party of the open door, which means you got to let people in, we've got to grow, we've got to unify, and with unity, anything is possible. So certainly, there will be work to do in Cleveland, especially if it's an open convention, and bringing the party together. I think we're going to have a lot of time to do that. But yeah, is it going to be a challenge with rhetoric like this on all sides? Sure. But that's what we have to do in putting on a convention that unifies and is open and transparent, and people feel that they had a fair shake, and we have to respect the voice and vote of all of the folks out there and the delegates and the voters. So I get the challenge.
I want to get back to this question. You say that when Trump and the other candidates got the voter data from the RNC, they signed an agreement. Did they, in that agreement, did they pledge, in return for getting the data, did they pledge to support the nominee? And are you prepared to enforce that agreement?
Well, I mean, listen, I'm not going to get into every detail of the agreement, but it's a data exchange agreement with the RNC, and among the things that they can use at the RNC, one of the things that we say is, look, we'll give you these things, but you have to agree that you're going to support the party and the eventual nominee. They've all agreed to that, and we'll see.
Yeah, but what are you willing to do to enforce the agreement was the question. And obviously your answer is nothing.
It happens. I would just say this. I really do believe, though, that this is posturing. And I know posturing can have an effect, and it means that the challenges could be greater. So I'm not dispelling your point in these questions, but I personally think that these folks are posturing, and I think that they want to be loyal to the party. I think they will be loyal to the party. But really, it's about the people out there and respecting the voices of the folks both in the states and on the floor of the convention.
I just want to button this down briefly if I can, because you say that there's an agreement. You gave them something of value, which was this voter data, you had access to your files. So are you prepared, if they break the agreement, to enforce it? In effect, what I'm saying is, are you prepared to sue Donald Trump or one of the other candidates if they don't support the nominee, as they pledged to do, to get the data?
Well, look, I mean, no one's broken the pledge. I mean, talking about what might be hypothetical is one thing. It's certainly not any standing. It doesn't provide standing to do anything. It's just a bunch of talk at this point. But certainly, we expect that when candidates make commitments that they keep them, and that's about what I'm going to say about it.
Okay. After Mitt Romney's defeat in 2012, you commissioned what has been called an autopsy of what went wrong and what the party needed to do differently going forward in 2014 and 2016. And the report concluded that the GOP had to do a much better job reaching out to Hispanics and African Americans, women and young people. But the Washington Post has a new poll out this month. 85% of Hispanics view Trump unfavorably. 80% of African Americans view him unfavorably. 80% of young people. 75% of women. Chairman Priebus, the Post concluded that Trump, at this point, would be the most unpopular candidate for president in modern times in either major party.
Well, look, I mean, obviously we're having a conversation within a small circle of people, and you know, tone and tenor have consequences, and it means that the challenges in a general election will be there for us to make the message to every American, no matter who they are, that our party is a door that we want them to walk through. But look, if you look at what's happening on the Democrat side of the aisle, you look at Hillary Clinton,
If I may, just briefly though, but hasn't Donald Trump, hasn't Ted Cruz closed that door for a lot of these groups that you wanted to reach out to?
No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of time, Chris, and in the general election, we're going to be having 10 people every 10 blocks in these communities, and you saw the difference that we made with what we learned from that Growth and Opportunity Report in 2014 when we won 46% of the Hispanic vote in Colorado. We spent about $8 million on the ground doing it. We won 28% of the black vote in Ohio. That didn't just happen because of just coincidence. It happened because we reached out to tell people of the values of equality and freedom and opportunity that our party provides. We're going to do the same thing.
Unfortunately, it's not going to work because, number one, presidential elections drive out more voters, and number two, minorities tend not to vote as much in the non-presidential elections. So their numbers are driven down, so then you get the minorities that are basically, call it, committed to the GOP voting, whereas on the Democratic side, they don't do as good a job getting their voters out in non-presidential elections. That's why your numbers went up to the levels that you indicated, and they're going to fall right back down when this presidential election takes place.
Do that in 2012. We just atrophied in 2012. And so, certainly, yes, tone matters, and when you say things
But you really think that Hispanic voters
it can have an effect that we can overcome.
Are going to forget what Donald Trump has said about illegal immigrants, what Ted Cruz has said about illegal immigrants? I mean, they're not going to forget it.
Listen, I don't know what the outcome is going to be over the next several months. And certainly if you're on the ground making the presentation to Hispanic voters across this country with a real operation, with real people, talking about the values of our party, I think that you can improve over 2012. We have to improve over 2012. But it's my job at the RNC to make sure that we're providing an infrastructure in place so that you can go door to door. You can go to the church festival on Sunday and go to the Black Chamber meetings and talk about the economy. I think that's how you move voters across this country.
One last question I want to get into with you, Chairman, in the time we have left. The RNC set up a website this week to explain how an open, contested convention would work. And I want to focus in on one specific issue that could become a big deal in July, and that's Rule 40B. Of the Republican convention. It says each candidate for nomination for president of the United States shall demonstrate the support of a majority of the delegates from each of 8 or more states. They got to have a majority from 8 or more states, or they can't even be placed their name in nomination. Now that's pretty clear in the first ballot. The question is what happens on the second ballot if, and a lot of these delegates then become unbound, if a number of them then decide to go for somebody else. Can that person become a candidate for nomination? And I guess the real question is, do you have to be a candidate for nomination? Can somebody completely outside, if 1237 delegates vote for that person, does that become the nominee?
Okay, so first of all, that rule is a rule that was drafted by the Romney delegates of 2012, and that rule obviously will be reviewed by the 2016 Rules Committee, which will be made up mostly of Trump and Cruz delegates, and they will likely have an incentive to probably not change that rule. But let's just play out your hypothetical. If in fact that rule stays in place, you're asking, number one, can someone on a later ballot, when most of the delegates are unbound, be nominated? I think they can be, but that would be an extreme hypothetical.
That's not an extreme hypothetical, because after it goes through the first ballot and possibly the second ballot, that is exactly what is going to happen.
And highly unlikely, but you asked the question, I think it's possible. And at that point, if you get into a multi-ballot convention where you got 5 or 6 or 7 rounds, it's possible that a person can be nominated that's not one of the 3. But my position is, and I think it's absolutely correct, our nominee is likely to be one of the 3 people running. So I mean, I think it's interesting how far out we can play this out, but it's possible as you lay out.
Chairman Priebus, to be continued. Thank you. Thanks for talking with us today, sir.
All right. So basically, he just let everybody know that there's going to be World War III at the GOP convention, because those delegates are going to be unbound fairly quickly, and once that happens, there's no telling who's going to get nominated.